All right, so let's start. Here we were last time. Oh, yeah, I'm not sharing anything. Okay, so here we were with Coase theorem and property rights. So I was last time about to go ahead and look at all the numerical aspects of giving the property rights to the fishery. But I thought let's see if you can more or less remember how things are going. So please take out your calculator and we'll calculate stuff together. I'm handicapped today because I cut my finger last week. Okay, so what is the total amount of money paid? Yeah. Yes, 200. So it's the so who pays what? Who? Yeah. So the fishery has property rights. So some nasty polluter who we don't like. So it's factory of some kind. Yeah, chemical factory. Yes, so exactly. So chemical factory. So that's buys 10 permits because the market price is 20. So buys 10 times to buy 10 permits. So the total benefit or the net benefit of transaction for the chemical factory. People at home can participate too. Yeah. Okay, let's do this. So what does the factory gain? Well, the factory used to abate everything, like not produce at all. So it's like if the factory is paying all of this to not pollute. And so now after the trade, the factory has the right to pollute all of this. So what does the factory gain? Well, the factory doesn't pay all this thing, all the area below the marginal abatement cost, which is the total abatement cost up to 10 units. But of course, the factory must pay 200. So the net benefit is 60 minus 20, so that's 40 times 10 divided by 2. So that's exactly 200. Well done. And now we must know what my next question is. So the net benefit to the fishery. Yeah. Yes, exactly, 100. So exactly. So here the fishery receives a big amount of money, so they're very happy. They are a bunch of sellouts who just sell their nice rivers to polluters, but it's not that bad because the damage that they have to incur is not all that great. So it's just this area below the marginal damage curve. So the net benefit is, of course, the payment minus the damage. So it's just this triangle there. So it's 20 multiplied by 10 divided by 2. So that's all right. So I'm happy that everybody remembers what's going on. Just go back to this. Yeah, so optimal pollution rights bought by the firm is you set marginal abatement cost equals to P. Optimal pollution rights sold by the factory is you set marginal damage equals to, why did I write 2P here? That's a mystery. I don't know where I wrote it. Right? It's because of this, right? So I made a mistake, sorry. Equals to P. So the marginal damage is, of course, 2 EFI equals to P. And the market equilibrium, so what we have is a uniform price. Of course, the price that's set by one is the same price that's received by the other and vice versa. And of course, we want no excess emission or no excess demand for emission rights or no excess supply. So EFA must equal EFI must equal E star. So we get that 60 minus 4 E star equals to 2 E star. Then we find E star equals 10, P star equals 20. This is the situation. And now, as was rightfully calculated, so the total payment is 200. The total damage created is, oh yeah, total damage, I didn't compute that, but it's of course this region there, C. So 10 times 20 divided by 2. The total abatement cost avoided is this whole area below the marginal abatement cost. So it's 60 plus 10, so it's 80 multiplied by 10 divided by 2, which gives us 400. So the net gain for the fishery is the payment minus the damage, so it's 100. Net gain for the factory is the abatement cost avoided minus the payment, so it's 2. So both of them gain from interacting on the market, so they are very happy. Conclusion. So the outcome is socially efficient because marginal abatement cost of optimal price equals marginal damage of optimal price. So this, not sure I should have written it this way. I think it's E star. Anyways, it's not wrong, but should read it this way. So the same price and the same socially efficient equilibrium can be reached independent of who holds the rights to the river. So what changes then? Yeah, so mutually beneficial bargaining between the two parties allow to either reduce incurred damage if polluter or reduce the excessive abatement cost if fishery had right. So what changes? Well, the net social gain will depend on who has the property right to environmental resource. So if no rights were distributed at all, so if the river was just free access, then of course the polluter just did as he wanted. And we start from a situation where we had excess damage, excess marginal damage. But also it's possible that we started the other way around, where the river was already somebody else's property. But in that case, there was excessive abatement. So what is the net social gain? Well, it depends on who started with the property rights. So it depends on the starting point. There are something else. Yeah, and also what changes, of course, is the fact that somebody is going to be much happier than the other. So if you receive the right, then you receive the right plus money, so you get compensated. So the theorem just says that we always get to an optimal solution. But so what are the conditions for the theorem to work? Oh, and then yeah, so the optimal level of pollution is reached regardless of the assignment of the property rights. So in practice, what may happen? Well, the rights must be well defined, of course. If it's not well defined, then you just go to court and argue forever. So that's bad. It must be clear who has the right to what. They must be enforceable. So even if I have the right to a clean water, if there's no recourse for me, then the factory, what's the incentive for the factory to buy to buy pollution right or to abate pollution if they just cannot and this is not trivial again, because you really need somebody to come in your river and measure the level of mercury. So you need somebody to do that, and that's not always possible. And they need to be transferable. So for instance, if I hold the right, my property, I must property and the rights together. Yeah, otherwise markets don't work well. Otherwise, it's not something that's as liquid as some other asset. So it must always be possible for me to take full advantage of having the rights. If I have some, if I don't want to own this river anymore, but some other buyers come, then they must know that again they don't have to go to court to make their case again. Otherwise, it's just not worth it for me to even start the whole process. So one very big problem is transaction costs. So litigation is a big one. So you may have heard that, so always settle. Never go to court. Because if you go to court, then everybody loses their shirt and lawyers buy new shirts. So you don't want that. You want, you need zero transaction costs. As soon as you have to make phone calls and lose time, it's just part of the thing that, so you're going to ask yourself, is it worth it to have a bit less pollution in my river if there's a mountain of procedure? And of course, you can bet that polluters know that, and they intimidate people and say, oh, if you challenge me, I'm going to court and you're going to spend a nice next 30 years of your chapter of your life going to court every weekend. So think about it. Yeah, so there's also negotiating costs and enforcement costs, of course, which I've already said. The more people involved, the more difficult it is to negotiate a solution. So it's why optimal pollution is point source rather than point source. So you want something that's, you want to speak to the owner of that factory. You don't want to have a river polluted by 10 different people, because that's just a mess and there's no hope. And local damage rather than regional or global. Otherwise, you may suffer some small damage, but not enough to justify fighting it. But you know for a fact that, say, 200 people have the same damage. So what do you do? Well, you should bring a group action against the factory. But so that's a whole big challenge too. So one example that comes to mind is not exactly environmental, but it's health related, was the use of Teflon in the pan, because it's sort of known that if the pans with Teflon that are non-stick pans, if you heat them too much, then you may have some residue in the food, and that could lead to cancer. It's not. It's yeah. You need a big exposure to that, but still, there was group action that finished a few years back that got a lot of money out of the Teflon producers. Because they were able to show that yes, indeed, they were badly affected by for their health. But you can imagine how, if people just stop going to court or just die because it's been so long, then yeah, it's all the benefit for the polluter who don't need to pay anybody. And so there is a paradox there. It's the fact that, so the best application is small scale environmental problem, but the theorem to work well requires perfect competition. It requires the fact that people take the market price as a given. So that's, for the perfect competition to work, then it must be the case that you have many sellers of rights and many buyers of rights. So you would have to have, for instance, 1,000 rivers that look more or less the same, and 1,000 factories that wanted to go somewhere. So then at some point, factories are going to go to the rivers, and there's going to be a market price that's established. So in real life, does that happen? That's more complicated than that. In real life, every situation is special. And so what may happen is that parties will just try to not have a market price, but to extract as much rent as possible. So, for instance, if you are for instance, I don't know, if you are the, I didn't think about this too much. Yeah. So imagine, for instance, that you own the right to the river and you are the fishery. And you can set the price as well. So what you want is to extract as much money from the factory as possible. So the market efficient price is P star. But what happens when you are a monopolist and you can decide jointly the market price and the quantity? Remember that? Yeah. Yeah. So what happens? What does the monopoly do? Yes. So, and knowing these two constraints, right? So this is essentially like a demand curve for the river owner. And this is its supply curve. So the river owner knows that this is the marginal cost incurred per units that they allow to be emitted. And this is the amount of money they're going to get. So if you have this, then, but you can also choose the market price. You can also pick the best price possible for you. What are you going to do? Well, not choose marginal damage equals marginal abatement cost. You're going to maximize the money extracted. So you would get something like this. So I'm not going to put that in the exam because it's more advanced, but just so you would have a marginal, a sort of, yeah, that would be actually, this is 15, so you would get 7.5. So that would be the marginal revenue curve, exactly like a monopolist. And you would decide that, oh, the best quantity for you is actually 6, and the price that you charge the fishery is not, it's not 20, it would be something like, yeah, something like 30. Yeah, you would charge 30. That would be the optimal amount of money you could extract. If you allow if you were allowed to choose the price per emission and the quantity, right? But could you even do better than that? You could even do better than that. Because you can have even more control. What you could, if you have the total control over everything, what you can say is, all right, I'm going to extract as much surplus from the fishery as possible, not deciding the price per emission and the quantity, but just giving an ultimatum to the fishery, saying, you pay me this huge chunk of money or we have no deal, and I have the right. So what, in that case, would you extract from the fishery? Well, you would look at what's the does the fishery get when they have the factory get when they have no right to emit. So they are here, they are at 0. What do they get when they have the right to emit 10? They are there. So the net gain is this. So I'm going to make their net gain 0. So I'm going to charge them this whole thing there, this whole gain from starting to emit the pollution minus 1 cent to make sure that they pay me. And so is that theoretical? Absolutely not. What you do when you are when you can prove in court that you did indeed incur some damages from something, then you cry as much as possible. You say, oh, but my life is so horrible. Now you have to offset the damage done to me by paying me $10 million. And so how can you really know whether that person really, it's their real feeling? It's just, I wouldn't like to be a judge in this situation because that's, so let me just remove this and this, but so these are the things that can go on in real life. So you can start having to really know what, as long as you give the right to somebody, then you give them a lot of power to just do whatever. If there's a good market, then the factory is just going to say, I'm never going to pay that because there's an identical river at 2 kilometers and I can do the same. And then you are going to go to a sort of market equilibrium. But if you're the only river in Canada where this can be done, then you have all the power in the world. Yeah, so conclusion, this is a major assumption of the model. So and that's what we mean by extract pure rent. So similar. If the owner both quantity and price of maybe once I asked that the question, but I think not in this class, but all right. So questions about this? No. Okay, so let's go to, so this is property rights in practice. What are the obstacles to applying them? But then, so are we discussing something just theoretical? No. So one application of Coase theorem is wind farms. So this one is sort of a good application. Why? Because wind farms can be installed in many places. So if a farmer is too greedy and just says, oh, you can have a wind farm in my field, but it's going to cost you a ton of money, then Hydro-Quebec can just say, oh, well, I'm going to the next farmer, he's more reasonable. So why am I saying sort of? Well, because on the other side, you have Hydro-Quebec. So you can have like many small consortiums or like native Canadians that would, oh, Amérindien, or how do you say that in English? First Nations, yeah, right. That can, so sometimes they want to have their own project in their own region. So you can have many parties that participate in the market. So as many as you get closer to a perfect competition equilibrium. So what happens? Well, of course, wind farms need some sacrifice to be implemented. So they need to be built, connected to the grid. And you can also say that they have downsides to them. So they affect the landscape. They produce sounds. Some people say they get cancer, but I don't trust that. They can kill birds. That's that's a fact that they do kill birds, because birds oftentimes they look down and they don't think that they're going to get some blade that's going to chop them. But reasonably, you have to think that so cats kill much more birds than wind farms do. So we shouldn't get too hung on that. But yeah, that's something we have to keep in mind. And so what happens? Well, if you want to make people incur these costs, then what you have to pay them. So Hydro-Quebec pays 1,500 per year for each turbine installed, and an extra $35 per year per hectare of property, which they must use on your land if you're a farmer. So that's a very neat example of cost theorem. So you don't need a tax, you just need some market where at some point people are able to negotiate the price of these nesty estates. Yeah, so it's a good application because the market is large. Now, sort of good application, but not as much, is disaster compensation. Why? Well, because in a way we should. So disasters are unpredictable. So if instead of having one big oil spill, for instance, we had some small spill every year, then that would be super easy to manage. You would just say, well, okay, you have so much money from this oil well, but you pollute a bit, so you have to rent this space and compensate for the pollution. That's your tariff each year. That's not how it happens. How it happens is you hope for the best, you hope you have no catastrophe, but once in a while you get a catastrophe, and then what do? Well, there must be somehow a way for polluters to still be kept in check or be accountable for what they did. So ex-post negotiation is a flavor of the application of cost theorem. So it's ex-post bargaining by polluter between a polluter and pollutee. So a good example of this is Deepwater Horizon. So yeah, so BP after that they got to pay. That's the highest payment that's ever been done before. So yeah, here I have the So before the spill, so BP was worth 180 billion. So I think that was the most valued oil company in the world, or close to it. And after, they were on the brink of bankruptcy. So we often think that, oh yeah, of course, they're not accountable. It's just they're not accountable. Well, sometimes they're not accountable, but in that case, they ended up being quite heavily accountable for what they did. Of course, some people would like owners or managers to go to jail. That rarely happens, but still they get to pay a lot of money. So their settlement was over 20 billion, including 5.5 billion under the Clean Air Act, 8.1 billion natural resource damage, and 5.9 billion to state and local governments. 15 billion in cleanup costs, so they ended up paying for their own cleanup, and 20 billion in economic damage to companies and individuals harmed by the spill. So that's a huge amount of money. Yeah. So it's not exactly cost theorem, but the flavor is there. It's some special place where of course, there's no market here. It's in a way, yes, because BP can choose to dig in many places, and then they know the risks, so they know that if something bad happens, they're going to have to. Yes. Yes, exactly. So yeah, so yeah, what's surprising is that the shareholders, when they hire some CEO, they never say, by the way, if you do a major screw up, you're not going to get the golden parachute. I think that that should be done, and then the CEOs would probably take less risk. Yeah. So one thing we have to keep in mind is, so people often think, oh, that's outrageous. The CEO got X million when they left. That's outrageous. Yes, but so the damage were. So you have to keep proportions in mind. You know, the CEO that they're paid in million, these are in billions. So that's just totally different things. But it's true that at some point you should get a pay cut. So, or I don't know. So the worst is that oftentimes they, even though they screw up, they're like, yeah, I was the one at BP. Oh yeah, so you have experience. Let me hire you to do something similar. So I don't know how these firms think. Yeah, another example. So closer to home, the Lac Mégantic rail disaster that killed 47 people and destroyed the downtown of Lac Mégantic, which is a very nice little town. So again, so here I'm less impressed, I would say, because there was a 460 million settlement fund that was put in place for the victims, for the people who lost dear ones, and creditors. But what's very bad is that, so the company didn't pay all that, so they paid some of it, but you see that federal government of Canada contributed 75 millions to that. So who's that? That's us. So we partly paid for their their destruction of the town. Not too not too thrilled with this result, but at the same time, at some point, you need to compensate everybody who lost money in that. And this is sort of saying that it was a freak accident, and so you have to be held accountable up to some point, but at some point, really bad things happen, and that are hard to foresee. Yeah, so that's and the firm is World Fuel Service Corp. That oil they provided 110 million towards the settlement. So they provided a big chunk of it. So that's not all. So I couldn't see how who paid for the whole 460 million. Yeah. So these are both where there's the polluter is so the right is for not being polluted on, and the polluter has to pay. One example is where actually the polluter has the right to pollute. Yeah, you may think that's outrageous. Well, that happens, or that used to happen. So have you heard of this Chapter 11 of NAFTA? No, so you might be too young to know that, but yes, so NAFTA was the North American Free Trade Agreement that connected Canada, Mexico, and the US. And part of this agreement was protection for investors. Initially, my guess is that was put in there because they were afraid of what could happen in Mexico, because Mexico always has a less than perfectly safe political system. And they were afraid, yes, but what if revolutionary people. By the way, so the party that was in Mexico is called the PRI, so Partido Revolucionario Institucional, I think. So it's yeah, it's in their name that they're the Revolutionary Party. But yeah, they were there for so many years that it was sort of a not a real dictatorship, but in effect, they never lost elections. So they were scared that they could just decide to expropriate people who invested in Mexico. So that, in a sense, why would you have a free trade agreement that would allow investors to invest in other countries if, anyways, they wouldn't go there because they would be afraid? So then they included in this NAFTA agreement the Chapter 11, which essentially said that if you are an investor who bought or started doing some business in some country, and then there's some law, whatever it is, that makes you lose profit or lose profits that you just anticipated you would be making, then they can just go to this what is it, settlement tribunal. I don't think I wrote it there, but there, yeah, there's a dispute settlement organ that's around Chapter 11, and say, yes, I lost money, please pay me. And then, so they thought, okay, that's a safeguard against Mexico, but it turns out that that was very good for polluters as well. And the Canadian government had to pay quite a few times because of environmental law. So, for instance, in 1997, they passed the Parliament, the Manganese-Based Fuel Additive Act, to prohibit this additive there, MMT, because it was bad for the environment. So so it was bad for vehicle emission pollution systems, and yeah, it had potential toxic effects. But then, Itil Corp, the company that owned this Canadian subsidiary, they said, no, we have property right there. So if you want to clean the environment, you have to pay us. So then they went to court and they sued the Canadian government. Yes. Yeah. So this dispute settlement body that's part of NAFTA. So, and since Canadian government signed NAFTA, then they have to abide by it. It's a treaty. So that's and so they ended up paying 201 million US dollar to that that firm just so that they wouldn't pollute. So that's crazy in my opinion, but yeah, that's the oh yeah, so no, I mean they sued for 201 million, but they actually had to pay 13 million in the end, out of court settlement in 1997. So what happened to this? So this idea, well, it turned out not to be such a great idea. So in the last treaty, that's the, I forget the name, but there's a new treaty now that that's taken effect like a few years back to replace NAFTA, and they removed this. So they said, okay, you can. You're not going to be sued if you put if you change the legislation for some legitimate purpose. So I don't know now what happens if you just lose money, but yeah. Oh yeah, so that's it here. So the CUSMA, so the Canada withdrew from this investor state dispute settlement body, ISDS. Yeah, that was the body that I don't know about Mexico or the US. Okay, so that's all I had to say for this chapter. So you see that this is by no means just some theorem that exists out there. It has a lot of real life application for both pollutee that owns right, but polluter that owns right. Oh yeah, so I have some exercises here with our favorite friends, Bob and Alice. Yeah, and Alice again is the not nice person that pollutes, and Bob is wants her to not pollute. So yeah, all of these exercises, I invite you to do them. But when we're done with, I would say when we're done with the most important chapters, so until chapter 12, I think I'm going to do correct the midterm and do a bunch of exercises. And then if we still have time, I'm going to talk a bit about Canadian environmental policy. But yeah, I want to do some just to go through some exercises because yeah, so the midterm was sort of not too bad, but not too awesome. that okay, environmental standards. What are they? Well, now we go to so cost theorem and property rights were the most decentralized way of dealing with environmental problems. So now we go to the other end of the spectrum. Now it's perfectly um, controlled or perfectly top-down approach. So we're going to look at optimal standards, what they are, standards with heterogeneous damages, standards with heterogeneous abatement cost, standards and incentives, especially incentives to innovate, and then some exercises. Yeah, so this chapter I would say isn't all that difficult. So standards are a type of command and control technique, also known as direct regulation. Yeah, so for example, an emission standard is a maximum level of emissions that is legally allowed. So you don't have minimums, you just have maximums, of course, because people can be more virtuous than not. So you just have a law that says it's illegal to emit past a certain level, and you can use courts, fines, and other law enforcement measures to ensure compliance. So it's a very nice thing if you want things done. So you just say, "Oh, I don't dislike this. Now it's illegal. It's magic. Now everything is as it should be." So what are the optimal standards? Well, I'm not going to, you're not going to be surprised that the optimal standard is when the marginal damage equals marginal abatement cost if everything is under control. So you should just say, yes, in this case, I'm the government and I decide that 10 is the maximum emission you're allowed to have. And of course, so firms are going to emit exactly 10. They might try to emit even less if they have some other things in mind, but usually they are going to step at 10. The total abatement costs are also called the compliance costs because it's just complying to the standard. So in this case, what are they? Take out your calculator, compute it. For people at home, 200. Yeah, it's always 200. It's probably 200 again. Let me see. So the compliance cost. So how much does it cost for the firm to comply with the law? Well, if there's no law, the firm emits zero. Now with the law, it emits 10. So the total cost paid to be in line with the law is the marginal abatement cost for all of the units that you abated. So it's 15 minus 10. Times 20 divided by 2. Oh, so maybe it's not 200. So that's like times 10. So this would be, yeah, so that would be, okay, so that's a small one. Yeah, so this is 200. Okay, so maybe you computed the total cost. Oh, just this, yeah. Okay, yeah. Oh, why did I put P? P has nothing, yeah. That's just confusing. So my bad. Yeah, the P there confused you, but actually this has nothing to do with anything. So you don't have a market price here. You just have the standard where marginal abatement cost equals marginal damage. I think is I copied the same image from the last chapter. Yeah. So that's of course this. So what are the advantages of standards? Where so they are simple and direct. You just decide this is the number, so you have to deal with it. So they set clearly specified targets. So you don't, there's no room to wiggle around. You have to comply with them. So they appeal to people's sense of getting environmental pollution reduced immediately. So essentially, this is something that's going to happen every time you have a new GIEC report, and they say, yes, we're on the brink of the end of the world. We're all going to die in 2 years if we don't do something. Then at some point, it becomes if you think that there's a cliff that's 10 meters in front of you, then you just say we put the brake on because we don't want to go over the cliff. Is there really a cliff? Well, it's as we've seen, the more we wait until we act, then the bigger the risk. Yes, but it's not necessarily the case that you need to do everything right away. So, well, it depends what you think is the how you think the all Earth's environment will react to emitting emissions. Yes, but it's not easy to really show that if we like don't do anything, we're going to be all dead in 100 years. But yeah, if we think we are, then of course that would be you would just say we don't have time to wait. Let's just make emitting CO2 illegal. It's also consistent with our ethical sense that pollution is bad and ought to be declared illegal. And of course, that firms should cleaning. Yeah, and also, so it confirms through an operation of the legal system, which is just to define what the law is and then stop illegal behavior. So, and it's also something that may work well in a country, more authoritarian country, like, so we may dislike China's authoritarian system, but when they do decide, oh, we're going to make our factories clean, then they just decide it, and that's the law. And but there might be difficulty to implement it at the local level. I don't know, but in principle, they can just decide whatever, and they don't have anybody who's going to complain if the if the central authority has decided something, then they just have to abide by it. So I would say in democratic. Not so easy. Standards. I had something on my mind, but I just forgot about it. This is all right. I'm going to add to my. So there are generally two sorts of standards that we can have. So performance standards, for instance, emission standards. So that sets a constraint on some performance criterion and then allows people to choose the best means of achieving it. So you just say you cannot emit more than this amount. So you comply with that however you like. And the other is technology standards. So you have to use a certain technology that we know is better for the environment. And then you build your, so if it's cars, for instance, then so yeah, car regulation is a big part of it. So cars have to abide by so many different standards. So environmental standards are part of it. Yeah, so emission standards are something like never exceeds level. So that apply directly to the quantities of emissions coming from pollution sources. So they are performance standards, meaning that they refer to the end results that polluters must achieve, however they achieve it. So they can be set in a wide variety of different ways. So emission rates. So for instance, kilogram emitted per hour or kilogram per kilometers, for instance. So many different ways. Concentration, so part per million. So you shouldn't, yeah. So for instance, so you could have something like standards per city, and just say, okay, each city must have at most this level of particulate per part per million. Otherwise, they're somehow in violation of the law, so they must do something about it. Total quantity of residual produced per unit of output, residual content per unit of input. So this is more tricky, but it might be done too, and this might be easier to do if you can monitor how much input is being used. So yeah, all of these things. So it's never clear which is best. It depends on the situation and the technology. And then technology standards are specify the technologies, techniques, and practice of that potential polluters must adapt. So rather than end result. so one example is a requirement that cars be equipped with catalytic converters or seat belt. Cars used to be much less safe and much less good for the environment back then. So now cars are much better. This is a history of the fuel efficiency standards in Canada. So in so in plain line is the standard. So what was set to be the goal, or what was set to be the maximum that the industry had to have. And in the dash is what the industry actually had as a result. So is there something that, so this is for trucks in red, and for cars in blue. So is there something that you, there's something that sort of looks fishy to me if I look at this standard? Yes? Oh, gee, I should have, okay, that's a good question. So it's about something that has to do with emissions, of course, but I have to check that again. Yeah, so this is, of course, in Dash, it's on average. So you can have sometimes offenders too that do worse, but yeah, on average, it looks like people were doing better than the standard. So somebody else has a comment about this? Then I'm going to tell you what my feeling is about it. So it's close to what you're saying. All at home, no. Oh yeah. Yes, so that's something I had to check. So it has to be to do with emissions, of course, but yes, of course, trucks are allowed to pollute more because yes. So that's not exactly my contention is somehow the fact that it looks too good to be true. So I can't know how these things were negotiated or anything, but my impression is, so you look at this and emissions were high, and then they went down, and then whoops, the standard went down. So it looks very much like, yeah. Yeah, so that's the crucial question. So there's two way you can interpret it. Either you interpret it as so the companies were warned, oh, by so 1980, for instance, the new standard is going to be 8, so better get your act together. Or less nice interpretation. Yes. Yeah, exactly. That was so. It sort of looks like, yeah, they waited for the car industry to be able to do something about it, and then they said, oh, by the way, now let's adjust the standard. Oh, you guys are doing very well. But as long as they just said we cannot reduce emissions, then and by the way, so that's in the 70s. So that's when there was so much things going on with gas prices. So like, if gas is cheap, so let's don't bother us with asking us to be to have efficiency in our cars. But then once we have the incentive to make cars efficient, because anyways it's costing so much money to buy gas, then oh, by the way, we can we're good with the new standards. Yeah. Oh, I wouldn't know about it. I don't know anything about cars. That could be, yeah. All right, so that's, yeah, you can be sure that there's a open channel of communication between big players in the industry and the government. It's oftentimes the same people, so they're just the revolving door going around. So it's interesting to ask yourself how these standards are decided. Oh, by the way, here that's nice though is you see that yeah. One thing to note is for cars, emissions are getting even more efficient, whereas the standard is the same. So at least things are going in the right direction. Yeah, so setting standards, in theory, you just set marginal damage equals marginal abatement costs. So in practice, there might be different ways in which it doesn't work well, especially if you have heterogeneous damages or heterogeneous abatement costs. So then, if you want to set a uniform standard, you run into trouble. So you need, as regulators, you need good enough information to decide what the target is, and you need precise enough information for on a case-to-case basis to really know what's going on. So yeah, let's just finish with that one. So standards with heterogeneous damages. So the damage that the same pollutant can have may vary by in different times, in different place. So for instance, yeah, I once studied in Mexico, and so the big problem back then was car pollution, especially in the downtown Mexico. And so they were saying, yeah, Mexico is the only place where you can see the air you breathe. But that's no longer the case because yeah, they have problems in China now, and in Mexico, the situation has improved quite a lot. But yeah, they were thinking about many ways in which they could say if you enter in Mexico and go to downtown, then it's going to be much more stringent in terms of emissions, and maybe like half the cars can't go. So they had some rules that cars with license plates ending with even numbers or odd numbers could go in some times of the day or some day of the week. So yeah, they really had to work hard to diminish pollution. And then of course, if you set a uniform standard, no matter where, then it might be too stringent for some places and too lenient for some other places. So yeah, one example is air quality. So if you are in an urban area, it's likely to cause much more damage than a rural area because you have many people who breathe it, and it's not absorbed by nature or by anything. So that would look like this. Yeah, so if you are in this situation, then what should you do? Well, of course, you should set a specific standard for urban area, EU, and a specific standard for the rural area. So in that case, then the marginal abatement cost would be low in the rural area because anyways the damage is low, but it would be high in urban area because we really want them to pay as much as to pay enough to reduce the emissions. And so what happens if you don't do that? If you have some uniform standard, so let's just see if you have 8. So here is that's 5, that's 10. So let's say we have yeah, 8. then you can see that you have oh, or let's do it here. That's easier. Come on. Oh yes. Yes. So if you have a uniform standard, then you will have two deadweight classes. So one here because you abate way too much for the rural area, and one here because you abate way too little for the urban area. So let's start with the urban area. So I didn't do it, so I hope I don't screw up, but yeah, I think I'm good. So what happens to the urban area? Well, the optimal standard would be this one, would be 5, and you emit 6. So at 5, you have marginal abatement cost that equals marginal damage for the rural area, urban area. But if you choose 6, then from 5 to 6, then you see that you have marginal damage that's too high and marginal abatement cost that's too low. So it would be cheaper to abate than to allow the emissions. And what is the deadweight loss? Well, it's, you can see it's this triangle there. That's deadweight loss in the urban from too little abatement. And then can we see the abatement deadweight loss in the rural area? Yes. So here what happens is the optimal abatement in the optimal standard in the on the countryside is ER. And then what happens if you ask firms to abate more, or cars say to limit even more their movement? Well, then the marginal abatement cost is very high, but the marginal damage is not that high. So what is the deadweight loss? Well, it's use some other colors. So that will be deadweight loss in from too much. So this one, yeah, it's not too complicated to understand what's going on. Questions about this? Otherwise, we can class is over, so we can leave it here, and we continue next time.